Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to another episode of the 80s ADHD Guy with Ben Glenn. That's me. Thank you guys for joining today. This is, I believe, episode 6, and it is really early in the morning. I do like to get up early. We'll talk a little bit about that for a minute. I think that when you have ADHD and you're younger, because you struggle sleeping, I struggled sleeping last night. My mind was just racing. If you're listening to this, when you hear a long pause, I am drinking a cup of water. That is part of my morning routine, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I think when you're younger and you have ADHD and you realize how hard it is to go to sleep, and it is. It's very difficult. I used to use this illustration, how when you've got this race car brain, if you've ever been in a actual race car, oddly enough, they don't have keys to those cars. They just have buttons. But in the ADD brain, there's no off button. There's nothing that we can really do to shut that brain off. I am 50 years old, and I have been trying to find that damn button my whole life. And there are some days where it is worse than others. And for some reason, and I don't know why. You know, I'm sitting here this morning. I woke up and I make sourdough bread every week. That is something that I got into. Gosh, it's got to be almost a year now. Somebody they gave me their starter, and you have to feed that thing. And I'll talk about that later. Good Lord, this is all over the place already. Is there any debate that I'm ADHD? But I got this morning, and I was getting the bread ready for the oven, and I was just like going through trying to figure out, what did I do last night that was different to cause me to be so wide awake, to have such a difficult time sleeping. And I don't typically have a really hard time these days, because I've created a structure, I've created a routine. And I think that that's really a key component to this, is that you have to have a consistent routine. You can't be changing it up all the time, which doesn't really bode well for me tonight, because I typically go to bed somewhere in that 9:30, 10 o'clock range. And now, of course, a lot of you are like, oh, he really is old. I do that because I'm up early. I do that because I know that in the morning when I wake up, I am at my freshest. If I had a good night's sleep, I can process, think, write, do different things better. In fact, I believe the last episode 5, I shot that in the afternoon. And I think that if you go back and you listen to it, and you listen to this morning's podcast, there'll be a difference there. There's a little bit more of a chaotic, hyper unleashed Ben Glenn in episode 5, because I pretty sure I downed a Venti Starbucks mocha loaded with sugar. And in addition to that, it was later in the afternoon, so a lot of my strength and ability to hone and to harness my ADHD, good and bad, has worn off. But I think that when you're young, because you struggle sleeping already, you're just like, well, I'm a night owl. I'm a night owl. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think that you just automatically stay up. Now, when I was younger and I had certain things that I needed to get done, because the Russian had kind of laid down the law, being the sympathetic enforcer. Back then, she didn't feel very sympathetic at all. I would plow through this work at night. Reminds me of the few years that I got into coding. I had made some educational entertainment apps, and I would get so hyper-focused on the coding and building these games that I would be up like till 2, 3 in the morning. And I had no problem doing that. because I was super engaged and I already struggled going to sleep. And so, but the crazy thing is that what I noticed is that in the morning I was so tired. And the benefit that you get from having a semi-refreshing night of sleep and waking up in the morning and being ADHD is that there's certain things that I believe that you can do that you can't do if you don't get a decent night's sleep. For example, writing. How in the world have I been able to write as many things as that I have written, as many books? First and foremost, a shout out to all my editors. I want to give a big shout out to my newest and greatest editor, Jenna Cruzy. Jenna, you are my hero. Thank you for all of your hard work and your encouragement. She's amazing. But I recently wrote a book called 31 Bible Verses Everyone Should Know. And not only was I able to write that book, but I also wrote a leader guide to go with it. And it was just one of those things where all of that writing got done in the morning. And then even after I would write it, I would even have the strength to go and do like a first edit. So I think that you've got to kind of weigh out what are you trying to accomplish? What are you, with that in mind, what is your occupation? Are you out in the workplace? Are you in school? As if you're in school, you don't have a choice. You have to go to school in the morning. So you've got to really create that structure, and you've got to really figure out a way to give yourself that routine that's going to put you to sleep at a specific time. And here's the thing. Here's something else I'll just kind of talk into. If you just lay in bed and your eyes are closed and you're in that space between sleep and awake, I think you're still getting some element of rest. Now, you're not in what they call REM sleeping. I don't know why they call that REM, but that's where there's that deep sleep and you physically are getting some incredible benefit from that. And that's where you want to go. I don't know how often. It'd be interesting. And there has been some studies, and maybe with this podcast, I'll be inspired to do a deeper dive, or maybe even bring somebody on that I can interview. When it comes to ADHD and sleep apnea, ADHD and sleep deprivation. Because a lot of times I think what you're noticing with cranky, out of control, hyperactive kids is not necessarily just all ADHD. It's also the fact that they're overly tired. I mean, if you think about when you've got a little kid and they're like throwing a tantrum, well, they just need a nap. I mean, how nice would it be if they did that to you today? If they'd be like, oh my, he just needs a nap. I would have loved to have the executive pastor at Mercy Road where I worked, who theoretically was my boss, just come into my office and say, Ben, I think it's nap time. It's funny, when I worked there, I don't live too close and I don't live too far away, but because my Sundays there were such a marathon, so I would get there at around 8:00 in the morning, and we'd have 3 services, and then sometimes right after the last service, it'd be like right around 1:30. We would have leader meetings, or somebody would want to go grab coffee, and then I'd have to be back at the church at 4 to get ready for what we called Sunday night, and that's where all the students would come and we'd have, a great time. And so when I was decking out my office, well, first of all, it was the very first office I really had officially. I've always worked out of my home, and so it's never really felt like I had an office. I mean, I have an office, but like, this is a real job. I got a real job, Mom. And that's actually true too. So I started speaking and traveling around right out of college. Started in 1995. I was messing around with things when I was about 19. So I'm 20 years old. Can't even rent a car. And instead of getting out there and getting a real job, people started hiring me to come in and do the art. And that's what I did. I started with the drawing stuff. And like I said, if you've never seen me, you have no idea what I'm referencing with the art, just Google Banglin the Chalk Guy. It'll come up. I'm all over the place. A lot of stuff that's out there too. It's funny because I look really young. I'm always afraid I'm going to get booked for a gig, and then I come in, my clients, it's like, you don't really look like the guy. that I saw online. Yeah, he had a little more hair. But the interesting thing is that I never really had a real job. And then, I get asked by somebody who actually was an intern for me when he was 19, who is now this very successful pastor who started Mercy Road. Gosh, it has to be, they got to be maybe 12, 13 years now. I know I was there for the 10-year birthday bash. But anyway, Josh Hoosman, shout out to Josh and Mercy Road Church. They do amazing things, and they have such a heart for the community. And I was honored to have an opportunity to work there. And yet it was just kind of funny to me how this all played out. Here's this kid who was an intern for me who's now giving me this job. And so now theoretically he's my boss, which is funny because there are times I'd look at him and he'd have to correct me in different things because I was the youth pastor. And to be honest, I'd never done that job before. I never went to school to do that job. I mean, he gave me that job because he knew that I had mentoring skills, coaching skills, and I came on to work with a young individual who just graduated from college, and just to be a support to him. And then I think also he gave me an opportunity to be in ministry in a different way. I've always been in front, never been with the students. So, and it really was just a tremendous experience. And I love everybody over there, but it was funny though, when he would have to set me aside and be like, "Hey Ben, we need to talk about your Google Calendar. We noticed you're spending 3 hours over at this one guy's house every Wednesday. What's going on there?" So apparently my time management, according to him, was not very good. And I kept trying to explain to him, I'm like, "Hey, I'm ADHD. I have the ability to actually go into beast mode. I can hyperfocus. I can do this job in 20 hours, all of the admin stuff." And I did. I cranked stuff out very quickly, which did allow me to have freedom to do a lot of different things. And for the most part, they showed me a lot of grace, which was good. But back to my office, I was so excited to have my own office. I went and I'm a big kid, and you can even see I got my Lego collection growing behind me. And eventually, if I get enough podcasts, I'm going to get time to build the hammer right here, the Thor hammer. Oh, it looks so cool. And I put a couch in there for one purpose only, and that was nap time. All of that coming down to just that right there. That's all I really wanted to say was, hey, I put a couch in my office for nap time. And it was really funny because one of my coworkers and heroes, and I shout out to Greg Strand if you're listening to this, every so often I come in there and he'd be napping on my couch. I'm like, "Oh, should I shut the lights off? We want me to light a candle, put on a little bit of mood music so that, you put you to sleep, put a little lullaby on." Anyway, so I'm diving into this paper that I printed off. There's several sheets here, and it is just basically things that I found online about ADHD, and I'm kind of just diving into it and attacking it as it would relate to somebody who grew up in the 80s with ADHD. I have not really gone through this because I wanted to have like that initial response, that not impulsive, but like, hey, what is my very first reaction when I read this? Whether that is the right way or not, if the Russian was sitting here, she'd be like, you should have prepared. You should have prepared. Sorry, Paulina, that was the impersonation of my mom. She's like, "Hey, I don't sound like your mom." But that's anytime I impersonate my mom, it always sounds like this. "Ben, you need to, you should eat more bananas. There's potassium in there." Love you, Mom. I think we'll have my mom on as a guest. It's going to be probably the most popular episode that I put out. But when you meet my mom, I'm going to warn you. She is the queen bee of ADHD. And that woman has no filter. If you're in the right frame of mind and you've got enough rest and you've eaten, it is absolutely hilarious. If you have not had enough sleep and you are stressed out and you haven't eaten, it is a nightmare. I never did finish up on the sleep thing. So, if you're younger and you find yourself staying up late and you are a night owl, I think that the one big parameter, and I'll wrap it up with this, is that, hey, are you actually being productive or are you just entertaining yourself? And that's a huge key component here is, if you've got 24 hours in a day, then you've only got 24 hours to get certain things done. And if you are at all ambitious, if you want to achieve and do anything in life, and I hope you do, and if you're somebody who has ADHD, please let me say something and just open your heart and your ears to what I'm about to say. Because you have that label, it does not mean you cannot do amazing and big things. In fact, I would argue that the opposite is true. The only thing that potentially could be holding you back is you. It's you and the limitations that you put on yourself because of maybe your rudimentary understanding of ADHD. Because you haven't really stepped into community with somebody like me who has had ADHD, who can give you different nuggets and different tips and techniques to help you thrive and survive. But you absolutely can do awesome and amazing things. You do not have to become the ditch digger that my mother threatened that I would become if I didn't do my homework. You just have to start owning that narrative. That's what my wife says. You need to own that narrative. And then on top of that, because we know that words are powerful, you need to be speaking it. You need to be saying it out loud. I have what it takes to get things done today. And believe that. So when you look at that structure and that routine of your day, if you are struggling to sleep at night and you've decided, well, I'm just going to stay up and watch and binge watch something on Netflix or get into video games and do different things like that. Well, you're not fighting the battle then. Okay, let's be really honest. There are these certain things that we have been given with this neurodevelopment disorder, as they like to call it, that we have to battle. And if you're not fighting the battle, then you're losing hours. And that is your greatest resource. It is the one thing, the most valuable thing it's the one thing you can't make any more of. That's why it's so valuable. So you need to figure out, hey, do I need to start fighting this a little bit more? Now, if you are somebody who, hey, in the evening, you are stepping into a productive time, and there are some of you that can do that. But you have to recognize that, and you need to note that, hey, this is getting done. From the hours of 10 till 1, I am able to achieve whatever. And for a very short period of time, I was able to do that. I was able to sit down at my computer and code like a crazy madman and make some really, really cool games. My favorite was a game called Booger Ball. Unfortunately, it's not out there anymore, but it was great. So if you need to battle that, then you need to maybe look at different things like, well, what can I do to help myself get to sleep at night? So part of that is looking at your diet, and that's a huge part of this equation that a lot of people don't take into consideration. I met this one kid the other day who has ADHD, and we were talking a little bit about his daily diet routine, and it was horrific. The amount of junk food that this kid eats is just astronomical. This morning, yesterday morning, I was putting together my pill packs, and my daughter, Annie, was standing nearby, and she was noticing all of the things that I was putting in each one of these pill packs, and she was like, gosh, Dad, why do you have to take so much? And that's a really good question. I'm taking, vitamin D. I'm taking that QC10 or whatever it's called. I wanted to say QP10. I'm taking magnesium. I'm taking the ginkgo stuff I can't even pronounce, glucosamine, fish oil, all of these things. And it kind of dawned on me that, well, probably the reason why I'm taking these is that I'm not getting enough of this in my daily diet. And so you look at this kid who's got this horrific diet where it's heavily out of the freezer and fast food, and you know right away that, okay, well, he may not be getting the proper nutrients, but he's also getting a lot of like artificial flavorings and, chemicals that he doesn't need, that will not and does not help with the ADD brain. And we can't take that for granted that, hey, well, because I'm young, we'll just kind of filter that through and process it well. No, you won't. All that crap is going to have an impact. So you do need to be mindful of what you've eaten. And so this morning when I was working on that bread, that was one of the first things that I was asking myself, what did I have last night? How late did I eat something? And the only thing that I can say is I had a cheesecake from Trader Joe's. I didn't eat the whole cheesecake. Some of you are like, you ate the whole dang cheesecake? Must have been a great workout yesterday, Ben. No, I grabbed this cheesecake, and I don't know why I'm on a cheesecake kick, but I used to hate cheesecake. But if you get a good one and it's got like that little strawberry glaze or something on it, delicious. And so they had these yesterday, and they were very reasonable, and it was actually really good. But I don't know. That was the only really weird thing. I don't usually eat sweet things at night anymore. I do have a glass of wine every night, and that kind of, has become my melatonin, if you will. Just one glass. They say that as you get older, it helps with cardiovascular things and blood pressure and all that stuff, and we'll find out if that's true. But, yeah, just last night my mind was just absolutely racing. Weird stuff. So you'll need to figure that out for yourself. If you get that good night's sleep, then challenge yourself to wake up early. And I think that the one thing that is super important is that you do this consistently. I mean, that kind of applies to everything. I mean, it applies to this podcast. Not all these pods are going to be amazing, but the one thing that I want to look back and say is I was consistent. And that's something that I can't say in a lot of different areas in my life. And that is, I believe, a very big ADD thing is that we start strong and then we falter. And we need to be able to start strong and stay strong. And that's where you get a coach and accountability and your sympathetic enforcer. But good sleep is very critical. So be sure you take that serious. All right, swig of water here. Okay. I've got a couple left here, and the symptoms and diagnostic criteria. I did kind of look over these very, very briefly a second ago, right before I started recording, because I wanted to read it so that I didn't muff it when I read it on camera. But here's the second one, and this seems really odd. I'm guessing this is going to fall under the criteria part. So the first one was inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and those I believe would be the symptoms. But then the diagnostic criteria include age of onset, the symptoms in multiple settings, home, school, or work, clear evidence that symptoms interfere or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational functioning. So that I believe is going to be part of that criteria. In fact, I even said diagnostic criteria. So includes the age and onset. I don't really know what that means, because I've met people that are in their 60s who've gotten diagnosed with ADHD, and so I know that they're diagnosing young people is like as early as 3 years old. In my opinion, I think that's too early. They haven't developed hardly at all. And 3-year-olds are already pretty nutty anyways. So I'm not really sure. That'd probably be a question for a psychologist and just asking them. So what aspect of the age is considered here, and why is that important? The symptoms in multiple settings. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Home, school, and work. The interesting thing about this is that I'm going to talk a little bit about my daughter, Annie, who has, I believe, ADHD. She's very, very much like me. She's got a 504 plan and an IEP. She was very different at school than she was at home. And so this is where I think when you sit down with the psychologist and they start asking you questions, well, this is why they need to sit down with the teacher and with the parent, because she was extremely different at home. She was crazy. She was one of the craziest kids growing up, and we were her safe place. I mean, even the other day, I don't know exactly what we were talking about, but she said something in the line along the lines of, I can do some of these crazy things and know that you guys still love me. And I love the fact that she knows that. And she's not wrong. She can irritate the absolute piss out of us and still know that we absolutely love her. And so I think when she would come home, it was this, oh, I'm finally free. It was almost as if she would put herself in this shell, go to school, and she came off as that inattentive type ADHD, which at home, no. She was capital H, hyper. And when she would come home from school, it was like this flipping of a switch, and she would kick one shoe off to one side and throw her book bag. And I mean, my God, her book bag, her backpack was just like the crap that she would go to the kitchen table and she would dump her bag and the amount of junk that would come out. And then there would be a piece of paper and it'd be all crinkled up. And you'd be like, wait, this is kind of important. This actually says that I need to sign this and get this back to the school. And it was all just kind of jumbled up like trash. Things were sticking together and you're like, what in the world? She's like, well, we were making slime last weekend and I had to bring it to school. I'm like, no, you really didn't. But I think that it's just looking at that is the first thing that jumps into my mind is, wait, the multiple settings. Well, what do they look like at home? What do they look like at school? And then as you see these kids, even the hyperactive kids in elementary school, the off the wall, crazy, get out of seat, out of turn, inappropriately, they kind of begin to shell up I think that's just the way it is in school. That by the time you get into high school, you've kind of shelled and protected yourself. You've grown that, I don't know what you want to call it. You've grown that mindset that, okay, I can't just be myself because everybody is looking at me, everybody's critiquing me, and the value of belonging is big, but the fear of rejection is even greater. So I think that's an interesting criteria. As far as the workplace goes, I think that it would be interesting because there's this evolution of, you got your elementary age ADHD, your middle school ADHD, your high school, college, and then you've got that workplace. And I think the workplace is different because the relationship is different. There is an expectation there. There is this fear of getting fired. And I think that, especially more now with younger people, a paycheck isn't enough. It's something that I've noticed. Like young people, they want to be validated. They want to be seen. They want to know that they're making a difference. And the paycheck is kind of like, third on the totem pole of importance. The paycheck's important. And the other side of that is that they all want to get paid a lot and they all think they deserve a lot. They all think that they should come out of college making $100K. No. You gotta work up to that. Unless you're like, a doctor or something, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what doctors make out of college. But I do know they go for a long time. So I hope they make a bunch because they got to pay back all those student loans. Clear evidence that symptoms interfere or reduce the quality of social, academic, and occupational functioning. I like how they worded it at the end there, functioning, the quality of the functioning in those areas, social, academic, occupational. So this goes back to one of the earlier podcasts where we talked about consistency. So is this ADHD consistently having an effect on one of those three areas? Now, if I go back and I think about what were the red flags for me? Well, all of them were academic. I don't think that I had any issue with the social side of things, as far as they knew. I know for myself, I felt awkward. I knew that I was different, especially when they labeled me. Then I really knew that I was different, and I didn't understand it. And so socially, that kind of caused me to shell up and become more of an introvert and become more of an isolator. But socially, I still knew how to have conversation. I still knew how to be polite. My parents did an amazing job of teaching me how to have manners and respect. I think that's something that actually has gotten lost in our society these days. We need to continue to teach our kids the very, very simple things like respect, manners, being polite, like having the ability to be outward focused rather than continuing to be self-centered, to be other-centered, look for opportunities to be an encouragement to people. I mean, all that stuff has to be taught. The other day we went to, I think I had mentioned it in a previous podcast, my daughter invited me to go to Laser Flash with her friends, and there were other kids there that were younger, and they were little butt stains. And I here I am, this 50-year-old guy, and I'm playing, and I'm having fun, and I'm a fun guy. At least I think I am. My daughters and even her friends had a good time, and I was very honored. Apparently, Annie's one of her friends said, "You got a really cool dad." So I'm like, "Hey, ching, win-win." But these little kids, they're probably in middle school. They were just super rude and disrespectful, and there was no element of manners there or politeness there at all. It was very much this entitled kind of entitlement mentality. And we've got to be very mindful of that if we're not taking the time as parents to teach our kids these things. And I think the difficulty is that we're not teaching them, and we're not giving those that are teaching our kids permission to do those things. And so here's where we'll get into a debate. This will make this pod go viral. Let's talk about corporal punishment. There are certain individuals that are listening to this right now that will never spank their kids. Oh, I don't believe in spanking. Well, you know what? Then your kids are going to turn out to be turds. They really are. I'm not saying beat your kids. There's a huge difference between spanking and beating your kids. All right? Be sure you know that. But biblically, it does say this: do not spare the rod. It does not say, hey, take that rod and beat your kids to a pulp where they've got to go to the hospital and they've got to, call, somebody because you've gone too far. No, not at all. But there is something when your child is younger that when you discipline them in that physical manner, it does have an effect. It has a good effect. It is this very rudimentary, you've done something, that it was wrong. We've talked about why it was wrong. And because of that, there is a consequence. And that consequence is it's going to have a physical feeling to it. And trust me, as a parent, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And I'm so grateful that I did not have to spank my kids very many times. In fact, we had a rule in my house. And if my daughters are on this podcast right now, they still know the rule. It was the 3 spanking rule. No more, no less. And whichever parent was the least upset about what was going on had to administer the spankings. Because when you're upset and you bring emotion into that disciplining, that's when it has the potential to go too far. But we had the spanking rule where you got 3 right on the butt. And it was for these reasons. You would get 3. The first one was to get your attention. The second one was the discipline. That was the punishment. And the third one was so you wouldn't forget it. And so just looking back, I think I had to spank my daughters maybe 3 times. My kids, they're great girls. They really are. They're amazing. It was funny, though. Spanking Annie was probably the most entertaining. There was a time where Annie really struggle with spitting on people. And we would sit her down and we would try to explain to her, Annie, you don't spit on people. And she especially spit on her sister. And my wife just did everything and anything to encourage her not to spit. Okay. And so the one time they're upstairs getting ready for bath, my wife comes out of the room, she's livid. And I'm just chilling out watching football or something. And she's yelled down at me. She's like, you need to spank your daughter. So apparently Annie hawked she hawked the nastiest loogie to Natasha. It was, just disgusting. It was just dripping. It's like, good Lord, kid, what were you thinking? So I had to be this spanker. And this was like maybe the second time Annie got spanked. And so I brought her downstairs. We're literally sitting in the living room. I'm like, okay, we've told you many, many, many times, if you do this, then this. And I looked at her and I says, all right, turn around, I'll give you your first spanking. And I gave her a nice little swat of the butt. And she kind of looked back at me. She was like, well, that wasn't fun. I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be. And then I gave her the second spanking, and then she made a fist. And when I gave her the third one, she turned on me like she was getting ready to fight me and swing. And so, you'll recognize that sometimes that corporal punishment doesn't work, but you do, even with ADD kids, because ADD kids are going to do impulsive things. And I mentioned this in an earlier podcast where you have to really figure out, by peeling back the layers, hey, was this an ADHD thing? Was this a neurological development issue? Or was this because they're just kids? Because kids are going to be kids, and ADHD kids are still kids. So you've got to figure out what that form of punishment is. And you may be that individual who's just like, hey, no, I don't believe in that. And that's fine. I'm not judging. I just know that when I grew up, if I was rude, if I didn't have manners, I would get that reminder right upside the head. And it wasn't abusive. It was just enough to get my attention and to point out the fact that, hey, this is inappropriate behavior. And I think that that's probably the big key factor here is we need to take time to point out that inappropriate behavior, even if it's in a situation where it may be embarrassing in that moment. There are times where I've been in a store where a kid has an incredible meltdown because they want something and they can't have something, and they just go like their brain is hijacked. And if they're ADHD and their brain is hijacked, spanking your child in that moment will not have any effect. But you need to neutralize that situation by taking your child out or not letting them continue to go down that inappropriate road. And you then wait till they, are in a teachable moment, and that may be some time. You may not get the things that you went to that store for. You may have to make some kind of adjustments there, but you can't neglect the correction. Because when you do, then you get kids that grow up and they don't know how to be respectful. You get kids that don't have manners. You get kids that don't even know what it means to be polite. And that's tragic. And so, and I had a handful of those kids. And I had no problem pulling them aside and having a good, firm talking to. And the interesting thing is that because I'm, who I am, I have that dad tone. And it wasn't a thing where, hey, and eventually when a child gets to a certain age, spanking is not a thing. Physical touch is not a thing here. Now it is hey, you are old enough to where we can have a conversation, and you have that conversation when they're in a teachable moment or in a teachable place, and it may take a moment. And then this is where you start taking things away. You eliminate things. You've got to create some element of pain there. And so that may be, hey, we're taking your device. We're taking away, your Xbox. We're not grounding you to your room. We're going to ground you to your homework, or something of that nature. I don't like grounding to the homework because homework already is hard enough. But there's got to be something, Everybody else is going to get ice cream and you're going to have to watch us eat it or something like that. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. But there has to be some kind of a consequence for our actions. Even if we fall into stupid pit because of our ADHD and there's an impulsive element there. Because like I said in a previous podcast, the world doesn't make accommodations just because you're ADHD and impulsive. So as far as these criteria, we'll just kind of wrap this up here. Social, academic, occupational functioning, it reduces equality. I absolutely agree with that. I think that that's where that diagnosis comes from. And some of you may have ADHD and never got diagnosed because you're high functioning. You have it, but because it didn't interfere, because it didn't reduce, because it didn't change the quality so much. Maybe it was difficult. Maybe you had to really work hard in order to manage some of those social situations or, the homework and the different things that you had to navigate at school and even at work, creating different accommodations through self-awareness. But because it wasn't so intrusive, you never really had to get the diagnosis. Now, the one thing that I think they missed here, and I'll leave this with on this point right here, because maybe in the next podcast I'll touch on that, is that you've got social, but what you don't have down here is relational. A lot of you could be really high functioning in those particular settings, but then when you step into a relational with a spouse, with a girlfriend, with a boyfriend, that's when it starts to really become difficult. And that's where you're like, oh, wait, maybe there's something here that I need to get checked out. Maybe I need to get some accommodation. And so I think that that is one thing that I would add to that criteria. All right, guys. Well, hey, like I said, it's morning time, so I'm going to say I hope you guys have a great morning. Don't know when you're listening to this, so if it's lunchtime, enjoy your lunch. If it's dinner time, don't eat too much. It'll make it harder to go to sleep. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope that you guys are enjoying this. I am looking forward to diving into my next episode, and be sure you give me a follow and comments and all that stuff. And per usual, this has been Glenn, and as always, love, peace, and Lego bricks. You guys have an amazing day. God bless.